What's up, Metal Brethren? Titanic One coming at you again live from the dungeon with the third part of the Glenn Danzig artist review. And it's Danzig, his solo project, his namesake band that he actually kept the name Danzig just so he don't ever have to change band names again. Um, Founded in 1987, started off as the remnants of Sam Hain, discovered by Rick Rubin. Rick Rubin kind of tried to put together like a punk rock supergroup when it comes to Danzig, and let's get into the classic lineup. Classic lineup consists of Glenn, of course, on vocals, John Christ, which is a relatively unknown guitarist up until this point, Eerie Vaughn. An interesting thing about Eerie Vaughn being in the original lineup of Danzig was when Rick Rubin approached Glenn Danzig about forming this supergroup, he had someone else in mind. I can't remember who, but the only way Glenn said that he was going to do this if he could bring over Eerie from Sam Hain, which apparently Eerie was his closest friend and member of the Sam Hain band. Anyway, and then there was Chuck Biscuits, the unsung awesome percussionist that in the Sam Hain video I forgot the acts he was associated with, and I can't believe I forgot this stuff because I mentioned this one of the bands he was in previously. Previously of Black Flag, the Circle Jerks, and Social D or Social Distortion. I'm gonna dive right into the discography, and then we'll start off with the first album, Danzig 1, back in 1988. And, it's one of those another transitional album for Glenn. Standout tracks, of course, a lot of people love the song Mother, and that premiered on this album, but yet didn't pop until 5 years later, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. Um, Personal favorites of mine off of the first Danzig record are probably Possession, Twist of Cain, End of Time, Am I Demon. Not a whole lot to say about the first Danzig record. It sounded kind of like Sam Hain's previous offering. Excuse me. Sam Hain 3, November Coming Fire. And then we get into the 1990s, where the really meat and bones of the early years of Danzig career, the Danzig solo band, kind of seemed to come into focus. And that was my personal favorite album is Danzig 2 in 1990, Lucifuge. This album, I think, is probably one of the best albums ever recorded. Um, the entire track listing is just great. Honestly, Glenn Danzig's vocals were probably at his peak on this album, which was really experimental. A lot of bluesy stuff on it. Standout tracks that I'm just going to go ahead and talk about. Of course, Long Way Back from Hell, the opener. Snakes of Christ, which there's an interesting subtext to this song, being the fact that Glenn sued the Stone Temple Pilots over the riff in this song, because it's basically, in his mind, he thinks they stole it for their album. I mean, not their album, their song, Sex Type Thing. And I don't know exactly what happened with that lawsuit, but I thought that was an interesting side note for Snakes of Christ. One of my favorite tracks, very bluesy sounding, is called Killer Wolf. Killer Wolf is amazing. It just really displays Glenn Danzig's range and power on this particular track. Her Black Wings is another good one. 777. I love it a lot. They kind of break it down a little bit with a song called Blood and Tears, which is a really ballady, just depressing song. Honestly, Lucifuge, I think, is probably the highest high point in the Danzig solo career. And then we get into 1993's How the Gods Kill, which is another just really great dark record. Featured the album art of H.R. Giger, and still with the same classic lineup. This is probably one of the goth metal celebrated albums. It's definitely really dark and atmospheric. Standout tracks on that one are probably Godless, Anything, um, Dirty Black Summer, When the Dying Calls. Just a really, really great record. I really recommend people new to Danzig to check that one out. Then we get to Danzig 4, Danzig 4P or whatever it's called. It's the last album with the classic lineup. I don't know why this lineup kind of ceased to be, but here it goes. Standout tracks on Danzig 4 are probably, this one got a video, but I think it's kind of one of the lamest songs in that album is Can't Speak. Another great one is Bringer of Death. Brand New God is probably my favorite on there. Until You Call on the Dark. Dominion, another favorite for me off Danzig 4 is I Don't Mind the Pain. This is where I also think is the last album produced by Rick Rubin. Up until then, Danzig's 1, 2, 3, and 4 were all produced by Rick Rubin, and after Danzig 4 and Danzig left the Deaf American label, they just kind of parted ways, and there was a lot of flack between Glenn and Rick Rubin. Also, I kind of skipped over this one because it's a live album, and I don't really dig on live albums, but it has to be noted, is Thrall Demon Sweat Live. This was also in 93, like right after How the Gods Kill came out, and this is where the big hit that Mother comes from, is from this record, the live record, Thrall Demon Sweat. To me, I think Mother is one of the overly celebrated songs in the Danzig catalog. A lot of people consider him a one-hit wonder for this song. There's a lot better Danzig songs than Mother. Going to be flat out honest with you. I can name 10 off the top of my head, but to keep going with the discography, we're going to go into Danzig 5, which is another really controversial record, being the fact that this was on the Hollywood Records label, which was owned by Disney at the time. And yeah, a big departure coming into Danzig 5. Danzig 5 sounds to me like a Nine Inch Nails record just fronted by Glenn Danzig. It's very industrial. I hate this record. I personally cannot stand this album. I love this band. I love Glenn Danzig's work, the entire body of it. But this album in particular, I think, is complete dog shit. Get into some of the members, because there's a lot of lineup changes up until now. The current Danzig lineup, which I'll get up towards the end of this video. There's Joey Castillo. He was there from 94 to 2002. Josh Resnick, Rob Blasco Nicholson from Prong, Jeff Chambers, Todd Youth, Howie Pyro, Jerry Montano. I mean, a lot of in and out with the lineup with Danzig up until now. Then there's Danzig 6, Satan's Child, which was produced by some of the cats from the band Orgy. I can't remember their names because I just really... Danzig 6 is a love-hate kind of album, but I'm going to go ahead and throw you some standout tracks off that one. One of them is probably one of my favorites from that album, from this period of Danzig, is a song he wrote for Johnny Cash called 13. Another standout track is Belly of the Beast, Five Finger Crawl, East Indian Devil, Kali's song, and then there's Lilin, Cult Without a Name. A lot of good stuff on Danzig 6, but yet at the same time, it's just really new metal. It's got a real new metal sound to it, and I just don't dig that. Then you get into Danzig 7, Illuciferi, which kind of gets back to the basics. I think that's when Blasco Nicholson comes into the band, so does Todd Youth. Really good standout tracks on Danzig 7 are definitely Kiss the Skull, Illuciferi, Black Mass. This one there's not a whole lot of great songs on here. Without Light I Am. So that's another good song off there. But I kind of skip over Danzig 7 because it's got some really weird sounding songs on it that I just really didn't get into. Then you get into the eighth Danzig offering, which was Circle of Snakes. Circle of Snakes was one of the last albums before he did, 2010. Circle of Snakes had some really great songs, a couple mainstays in the Danzig live set now, which is Skin Carver, Thousand Devils Reign. Again, with Circle of Snakes, I kind of feel that album was just really just thrown together at the last minute and just not one of my favorites in the catalog. And then we get into the lost tracks of Danzig, which I'm going to really talk about, and it's got a lot of stuff that hit the cutting room floor on the Danzig discography, but the key highlights of this 2-disc set for me is the Sam Hain stuff that finally surfaced. A song called when Death Had No Name is one that they performed in almost the first 4 Danzig albums. In the writing phases of these 4 albums, When Death Had No Name was one of those that kept popping up but just never got laid on any of the records. Pain Is Like an Animal was one of the leftovers by Sam Hain that is just fucking amazing. There's some of the controversial tracks on there also. One called White Devil Rise, which was kind of like Glenn Danzig's rebuttal to Louis Farrakhan at the time. And it was another one of those things that kind of started the parting of the ways between Glenn Danzig and Rick Rubin. And then we're going to get into 2010's Death Red Sabbath, which I think was a great return to form. I celebrate almost every track on this record. Hammer of the Gods, On a Wicked Night. Oh man, there's just so many great tracks on Death Red Sabbath. It's kind of hard for me to remember them all, being the fact that I'm trying to throw all these albums into one vid. It's kind of taxing on the brain here. Then we get into the current lineup, which I got to talk about because this current lineup I think is better than the classic lineup almost. You got Tommy Victor still. Johnny Kelly from Typo Negative is on the new Danzig lineup, and he's just fucking great. And another thing that I think is really cool about this current Danzig lineup is Steve Zing from Sam Hain is back, but he's not doing drums, he's doing bass, and I just think that's awesome stuff. That being said, we got supposedly 2 new Danzig records coming out here soon. On the 27th, there's going to be the Skeletons cover album by Danzig, and it's really highly anticipated by myself personally. I've heard one track of it off of it already, which is his cover of Black Sabbath's NIB, which it's awesome. I love this fucking track. I'm going to go ahead and rate Glenn Danzig's solo career, okay? And that is, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5, being the fact that there was a lot of lackluster albums in the Danzig solo career. But that being said, Glenn Danzig as a whole, his whole career, I'm going to go ahead and rate this artist 5 out of 5. He's just one of my favorites of all time. But, let me know what you think. Hit me up in the comments. Tell me you love him or hate him. He has had a bit of a controversy lately with a beating that happened with someone at one of the shows, but I'm not going to touch on that. Get on your, social media. You could definitely hear about that on there. I think the guy had it coming, but, form your own opinion. Scott Tanic 1, signing off. Later on, Metal Brethren.